Hello students, I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, faculty with the School of Gender and Development Studies IGNOU. I am the course coordinator for the course BGS 002 Gender Science, Technology and Society. Today we are going to have the introductory lecture of the course, that is Introduction to the Gender and Science. I think you might have seen the course material in the SOEM platform. So also you might have watched the video, introductory video on gender, science, technology and society. Once again, I welcome learners to this course, and let us look at how are we going to go about today's lecture. What are the learning outcomes? After watching this video, you are expected to learn what is understood as gender, as the course signifies the relationship between gender, science, technology and society. Therefore, we have to look at gender or understand gender as an analytical category, and how this category has helped us to understand the social realities. Second, comprehend various strands of feminist perspectives to analyze the relationship between women and society. And finally, understand concepts related to gender relations, gender dynamics, and gender identities in the context of social landscape and developmental discourse. What are the objectives? The objectives of this particular unit is to analyze the interrelationship between women society from a feminist perspective or from a gender lens, critically discuss women's position in society with reference to other social categories, meaning caste, class, ethnicity, religion, so on, disability, sexuality, so on and so forth, and familiarize with concepts related to gender identities, gender socialization, gender norms, gender roles, masculinity, femininity, gender mainstreaming, and at the end, what are the policy discourses which have actually led down the path to create a gender transformative society in the past. When we are looking at gender, let us look at some of these key questions, that is women's role in the society. Gender has been an organizing principle of the society. Gender, along with other social institutions such as family, marriage, caste, race, class, religion, and ethnicity, shapes the social structure of the past and even in the present or today's society. Therefore, women's question has been central to women's movement in the West, so also in India. Similarly, in the 19th century, social reformist movements, and also for building of the nation state, or how to bring about or how to create a gender inclusive society or gender transformative society. How do we understand gender? It's very important, because as in the beginning of the lecture, I explained or I used the notion that gender as an analytical category. Unless and until we understand gender, how do we use this as an analytical category? So gender is not a binary grammatical category to differentiate between the forms of words in a particular language, like male, female, transgender, so on and so forth. Gender does not mean only women, because gender is not the same as the biological sex. Gender is not fixed, but it is a process by which a person, an individual, acquires certain traits, needs and interest, and assumes particular gender roles and responsibility. And this is by Krishna in the year 2023, and you can always refer to the course material, that is Unit 1 on gender and society, to be able to understand it in a much more comprehensive manner. Gender is not we are born with, but is constantly shaped by our society and by our interactions with social institutions like caste, community, ethnicity, sexuality, disability and so on. Social structure like caste, class, religion, ethnicity not only creates a gendered hierarchy in the society, including family and household, but also perpetuates systemic male domination across social institutions. Let's take an example. I think you may be having examples in your day-to-day life. However, let us take some of the examples which are always there in the course material of BGS 002. That among plains dwelling peasant and caste societies, the control of productive resources, labor and knowledge is organized in a hierarchical manner, and this may be on the basis of gender, caste or community. Similarly, male-dominated societies have gendered stereotypes against women using the plough, denying them their rights to own a land. So, women may have access to land, but when it comes to owning the land, the ratio would be very less or marginal. The practice of witch hunting and non-participation of women in the local system, in the local political system. So, therefore, when we are talking about gender as a concept and how it's going to, how social structure has perpetuated gender inequity or gender inequality in the society and why it has been perpetuated, that is because of patriarchy. And what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is an ideology which is perpetuated through social institutions. Krishna argues that there are different views about the emergence of patriarchy, which is the systematic privileging of male domination of the family, household and other institutions. So, when we look at family, are we going to look at female as the head of the household or male as the head of the household? So, primarily in the context of South Asia and India, we could see that male is the head of the household. In patriarchal societies, primarily the descent, inheritance and succession are traced through the male line. Such societies are often also patrilocal, in which a married woman moves to the home of the husband or to his paternal home and where authority vests with the patrilineal king. Let us understand women's role from a multiple perspectives. So, one of the perspectives that I took is the Oriental discourse, which addressed the women's question in relation to various ancient texts, myths, and the focal starting point was the ritual of sati or the practice of sati. Ancient cultural perspective within which it's very important that you may look at the work of Susan Wadley's, like in 1977, 1988 on women and Hindu tradition, who argues that how women in the Hindu society constructed of an ideal Hindu woman. In her work, she argues that the Indian society represents a duality with regard to the nature of femaleness. On the other hand, a woman is benevolent, generous and fertile. On the one hand, a woman is benevolent, generous and fertile. On the other hand, she is malevolent, aggressive and destructive. Wadley explains this dualism that exists in the society with reference to two forms associated with women, namely Sakti, representing the energy form, and Prakrit connotes the nature. Sakti is the creative female principle that defines both divinity and power associated with reproduction. Prakriti represents the counterculture of the cosmic person, that is Purusa, which represents the undifferentiated source of nature and the spirit. The unity of Purusa and Prakriti has been the foundational belief behind biological conception. Female represents both facets of femininity, which include Sakti, which is powerful. Sakti means power and Prakriti means nature, and she is capable of eradicating the evil from the society. Wadley's analysis of power and nature can be used as a framework to understand the existing gender relations dynamics in the society. Within the dualistic framework of Purusa and Prakriti, woman symbolizes with earth or field and the man represents the seed or culture. This framework is also further explained by various scholars, anthropologists, social anthropologists like Leela Dubé in her work on symbolization of biological reproduction. Dubé states that how symbolization of biological reproduction is expressed through terms like seed and the earth in our society. Seed gives life to the child which comes from the father's blood. And on the other hand, earth identifies with womb, which provides warmth and nourishment or nurture to the fetus, and it gives growth. This dichotomy of seed and earth depicts the role of mother as a nurturer and caregiver within the home and the society. And therefore, it also, this dichotomy of seed and earth, or the metaphor of seed and earth, also depicts the hierarchical gender relation that exists in the society vis-a-vis women and the men. Let us now look at one of the important concepts while reading about gender is femininity and masculinity. So, notions of femininity and masculinity vary across society, class, community and caste. Traits and behaviors that are considered feminine or masculine are also specific to particular socio-cultural context, which is also argued by Krishna. Femininity and masculinity are not the natural result or the consequence of sexual difference or biological differences, but it arises from the systemic norms enforced by the society on girls and boys. Therefore, like you can also look at the work of French writer Simone de Beauvoir, and many of the students, learners may be aware of Simone de Beauvoir's work and her famous statement that one is not born as a woman but rather becomes a woman, which led to create a path-breaking position, that is, gender is socially constructed. So, gender is not biologically constructed, but it is a social construction, and therefore we can take gender as an analytical category like any other social categories: caste, class, disability, sexuality, ethnicity, so on and so forth. Social norms, behavior and traits typify what it means to be a woman, a man or a person of third gender. V. Gita points out, ideas of femininity and masculinity affect our food, our clothes, even our sexual relations and thoughts, shaping how we perceive ourselves and others in our daily life. Now let us look at the another important concept, that is gender power relations, which also looks into the dichotomy between public and the private sphere, that private is also political in nature, and the difference between public and private sphere depicts the gender relation that women are into private sphere and men are primarily into public sphere. But however, there is a change in terms of going beyond the dichotomy of public and private sphere in the contemporary context, and it is because of the gender transformative policies. The gender power relations explains the meaning of social construction of gender, as the power governs the gender dynamics between women, men and third gender or queer community in the family, community and society. In society, class and caste hierarchies are sustained by controlling women's sexuality and labor and their access to public sphere. So, the whole question that what is power? The power which governs social institutions and creates or sustains a particular kind of gender hierarchy in the society. Let us now look at another concept, that is gender division of labor, and this is one of the significant concepts when we are talking about even gender, science and technology. So, in this concept of gender division of labor, you may be aware that how societies are organized around gendered patterns of work or labor. Studies across the country have shown task differentiation among women and men, in which specific tasks like collecting water, fuel load, selecting seeds, winning, etc. is primarily done by women. Among most farming groups or peasant communities, women are known as skilled selectors of crop seeds, or they preserve local knowledge systems in agriculture, in health, and conserves, but among some communities, women's touch is believed to pollute the food crop or the seeds of the food crop. The above examples exhibit how social practices govern or determine the distribution of labor or specific tasks across communities. When we are looking at the gender division of labor, it is also significant for our learners to understand, from a feminist perspective. So, today I gave only one perspective to explain, that is the socialist Marxist perspective. Socialist feminists contested the Marxist idea of labor or work that only benefits to the bourgeoisie in the proliferation of capital and wealth. Annette Kuhn argued that family as part of the existing social system has been the side of women's subordination across societies. She states that Karl Marx in his book Das Kapital emphasizes the significance of reproductive labor to capital, but could not explain the side where it gets reproduced. Friedrich Engels states that women's subordination is shaped by the creation of private property as it created new economic relations within the market, that is within the labor market and in the family. Some socialist feminists reject this idea of Engels and argue that women's subordination lies in the bourgeoisie ideology, which believes in appropriating women's labor within family and even when they enter into the labor market. Therefore, you could see that, the flexi work, the, part-time work, temporary work, informalization of work primarily is done by women. Then, let us understand gender in the context of development, because when we are talking about gender or the relationship between gender and society, it is also important for us to understand certain concepts related to gender in the development discourse, because the transformative action or the policies are primarily focused on creating a gender inclusive society. And therefore, how do we create gender inclusive society is maybe by creating or framing gender by framing gender just policies in the society. To be able to frame gender just policies, it's also important to know some of the key concepts. So today we are going to look at two key concepts in the discourse of development, that is gender mainstreaming or mainstreaming gender in the policy discourse and gender analysis. According to Maya Buvanik, mainstreaming gender in organizations is only possible if we pay attention to three issues. One is the internal and external political processes in which a particular development organization and its members may be engaged. Second, the setting up of the machineries entrusted with the task of incorporating women and or gender issues into the design and implementation of policies. And third, the development of appropriate tools and technical capabilities. Mainstreaming gender is both a technical and political process which requires shifts in organizational cultures and ways of thinking, as well as in the goal, structure and resources allocation of international agencies, government and NGOs. It means to integrating gender concerns into the culture, structure and practice of any organization. And it is very important because when we are talking about the discourse of science or the culture, practice and structure of scientific organization or doing science or practicing science, here gender mainstreaming plays an important role. Gender analysis, and how is it different from gender mainstreaming, or how do we locate the concept of gender analysis in the development discourse? Gender analysis is the framework to understand the relationship of women and men in society and the inequities in those relationships by asking certain questions: who does what, who has what, who decides, and how it gets decided, or how the knowledge gets constructed, or how the resources get distributed, who gains what in the society, and who loses the resources or their access to knowledge. Therefore, gender analysis breaks down the divide between the private sphere and the public sphere, which we had spoken about it earlier, which deals with the relationship in a wider society and taking across gender relations between men, women and other gender. Conditions and position. Condition describes the immediate material circumstances in which men and women live related to their present workload and responsibilities. Position describes the place of women in society relative to that of men. Changing women's position in society requires addressing women's strategic gender needs and practical gender needs. And in gender analysis, we need to also focus on three concepts, that is access, control, status and role. Access is defined as the opportunity to make use of a resource. Control is the power to decide how a resource is used and who has access to these resources. And status and role look into the visible gender roles and invisible power relations between women and men, which defines the status of women and other genders and marginalized men and their roles in the society. Finally, we are concluding the session with looking at or reflecting the 5-year plan and how certain plans have shaped women's position in the society. The first 5-year plan looks into the welfare of women, which is focused along with the welfare of socially disadvantaged groups, including destitute, persons with disability, aged and so on. Second 5-year plans is the welfare approach. Besides women's education, priority was also on improved maternal and child health services, supplementary feeding for children and expectant and nursing mothers. Sixth 5-year plan shift its approach from welfare to development of women, that is women in development, where multi-pronged approach having thrust on health, education and employment was given. Seventh 5-year plan aimed at raising women's economic and social status and bringing them into the mainstream of national development. The thrust was on generation of both skilled and unskilled employment through proper education and vocational training. Eighth 5-year plan emphasizes on the development of women with specific emphasis on empowering women as agents of social change and development. Ninth 5-year plan, significant changes was in the conceptual strategy of planning for women's development. Attempted a focus on empowerment of women. The plan also aimed at convergence of existing services available in both women-specific and women-related sector. 10th 5-year plan continues with the strategy of initiating programs for women's empowerment through their social empowerment, economic empowerment and by achieving gender justice. 11th 5-year plan emphasizes on gender equity, gender budgeting and creation of an environment free from all forms of violence against women. And with this, I end my lecture, and maybe we are going to have the second lecture on the structural violence or gender-based violence. Thank you, and you may look at the references. The references are very important, and some of the references you can get online, and you can understand certain concepts by reading those references. Thank you so much.